My question that I'd like to start with really has to do with one I think that most people are always curious about, because for most people the artist remains a kind of mystery. And how did this mystery come to be, as it were? So I think one of the fundamental questions that people are curious about, at least at the beginning when they meet an artist, is how did you come to be an artist? And I guess that's my first question. What circumstances or what path did you travel to get to this point?
It starts in my childhood, probably as for most of the people, but when I was little I really got into, well actually I remember specifically one moment, and I think I was in my first year or second year of a primary school, so I had to be, I'm assuming 8 years old or something like that, or 7, maybe 7. And I was coming home from school, and I saw there were 2 people doing painting of our church, Gothic church, in the little town in Poland where I grew up. And I remember I just stood there for a very long time, totally fascinated how they were depicting something that I looked at every day through my window. And this thing was appearing here in front of them. So I was very fascinated by this. And later I basically copied the same painting from memory. So I did a painting of the church that I can see through across the window, except I didn't look at the church, and I was painting the church from the memory of the painting of the church. And I showed that little painting to my brother, and being praised, I don't know, but it encouraged me to paint. And I had this few years, well, I don't remember, that I really got into painting, and that was really my world. And I had little games with my brother where he was showing me different paintings of mostly like French Impressionists, etc. And our game was that he was showing me a painting and I had to guess who was it by, right? So that was a very kind of special period in my life. And then I went to high school. I didn't do any art in high school. Actually, I played piano, so that was parallel. I do have like almost 10 years of classical training playing piano. And then after high school, I decided to leave music and go back to visual art. Yeah. Maybe because my brother was a musician, so I don't know really if that meant that I definitely wasn't aware of it, if it was an influence back then, but yes.
And then at some point you ended up drawing pictures and selling them in Rome.
Yes. So that was during the time that I left Poland and I immigrated to Canada. But before immigrated to Canada, I was in Rome for 9 months, and this is where I started my process of immigration. My sister was sponsoring me to Canada because she already lived in Canada for 6 years. And during our first week in Rome, I went, in order at that time to leave Poland, I had to have an invitation, and we received, the details are somewhat vague, but I received an invitation to go to a course, summer course in Rome, and it was me and another a student at that time of already Academy of Fine Arts in Warsaw, Andrew. So both of us ended up going to Rome for this course, except except we realized that when we landed in Rome and that the course was over. So the whole procedure of getting passports and getting tickets and organizing the whole thing, there was somewhat miscommunication, but I can explain where. So here we were in Rome without place to stay or food to eat. So one of our experiments was to try to make some money selling paintings or drawings. So in my case, I was invited a lot for coffees for my drawings. And Andrew, he did a series of paintings and he decided to go to the biggest Piazza Navona in Rome, where everybody was selling different kinds of stuff. And then his case was that police came confiscating all his drawings and gave him a ticket for something thousands of liras at that time. So that was our adventure in trying to sell our art.
If an artist has trouble selling pictures in Rome, what's an artist to do? Which leads perhaps to a more serious question. What, in your travels, and of course you went ultimately to art school here in Canada, and now of course you're working internationally. In this whole process, Anna, would you be able to say that you have had thoughts about what an artist actually can do, what art does, how it functions?
Yes, of course. I ask that question myself every day. It's a complicated question. I definitely believe that art is a very important factor in society. And I think we need to, I think socially it's not being, and socially or politically it's not being recognized enough, I think. And and also, now that I'm collaborating with scientists, I also would say that I've been thinking about it in the context of education. Because, again, I think collaborative efforts are very important. And this kind of division that exists in education, it prevents people from being open and from being open to collaboration and to exchanges and to creating something bigger than within one own kind of defined space, territory. And it's also a question of language. Being divided, meaning being in arts, we develop certain type of, there's a lingua, certain langage to any discipline. And therefore, one of the barriers that one has to overcome when in collaborative effort working is that barrier of langage, the different way, even different modes of communication. So sometimes, I don't have a specific example now, but sometimes one word can mean different things for different people. And you sort of take it for granted that this is a very simple word, and you know it, yet it can be specifically between, physics and art. So, but this aspect of education has become something that I've been thinking about most recently more. So maybe that's why I'm talking about it now. Because I think if from the beginning we have a system that tells you that art is something less than a science, depends, but definitely I think I was educated in that way. I definitely see it that it exists strongly in France. I cannot quite comment in Canada because I didn't go to secondary first or secondary system in Canada. But even in the university level, there's a still huge big divide between social science and humanities and sciences, right? So for me, that building that bridge is quite important. And in a sense, this is what I'm trying to do through my art now. And that brings that importance into what I'm doing. So I guess this is in a sense that for me, going through art education, I guess thinking about art for the sake of art, or art for the sake of just aesthetic pleasure, it's not enough. So therefore, in my development, I was kind of trying to open that to a larger scope. And this is kind of how I navigated and how I came to the point where, for example, now I'm working and collaborating with scientists. And I'm not trying to put value judgment either on the fact that that there is art very much engaged in the whole historical development of aesthetics, beauty, etc. I think this is also important, but I guess for me personally it wasn't enough. So I was trying to get into something more and something to be able to reach a wider audiences, something to be able to reach just further, because as anything, but art can be quite isolating, and so it creates a kind of self-bubble, and that exists in any discipline, really. Mm-hmm. But that's what for me the exciting part is opening or trying to connect those bubbles. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like soap bubbles, so with many things. So they're like creating foam. So let's create foam.
You raised the question of the public, and clearly you're interested in having a relationship to the general public, not just to the much more constrained audience that typically is interested in artworks. But I'm kind of curious, when one moves from the one to the other, from the restricted audience of art itself to the general public, how one negotiates that relationship, because clearly as a professional artist you need to attach yourself to both relationships. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think, I can, let me maybe arrive to some kind of conclusion or not. It started, I remember, from a desire to, I was always against this notion that when you go to a museum, especially to museums, you are not allowed to touch anything. So it was my, in a way, my rebellious side that wanted to do things that I rebelled against that notion at some point. So I started to create artworks that where I invited public to like I made outfits that I invited public to put them on. So therefore that was my way of kind of reaching and breaking the boundaries of non-touch. Although it was great, but for me as an artist it was also very cumbersome, because it meant that for quite a few years, all what I was mostly involved with reparation of my artwork, and by using the rubber latex as material that deteriorates. So really, there was a few years, and that was one of the reasons why I abandoned finally rubber latex, because I didn't have time to think about new work or what I was doing. I was repairing my work because so that was one aspect that after, well, first I realized about the material, and then of course I continue in the sense of this participatory work. So first it was material, but then in the process of participation it also was kind of a difficult negotiation, because they were, you know, one of a kind pieces. So I made them. They weren't mass produced, they weren't even produced industrially. So in a sense they were fragile. So again, this negotiation of participation, but yet the wear and tear, was constantly a big issue for me. I'm thinking about, don't know, I'm jumping, but I'm thinking about now, whatever that now means, or more recent. Well, the most recent project is my collaboration now with scientists on the project of the mist collector, which is exactly the video that we are seeing. And yes, in this case, I think maybe that negotiation is arriving somewhere, because this is the video that it's a single channel video that was used in a video installation, in 3-channel video installation. So this single channel was divided through the software and through the hardware of the splitter into 3 video projection. And in a sense, the project, the Mist Collector project, is about collecting water from fog. So traditionally fishing nets have been used to collect water from fog, and that technology exists has been used for many years, especially in South America. And this collaboration is mainly focused on the fact that there are issues of clogging and drainage in the process of collecting water from fog. So our challenge, in a sense, was how to improve this method of collecting. And I say that loosely because, again, it doesn't mean we will arrive there, but it is a process of keeping that in mind. Why I'm saying that, because now working with scientists, I actually realized quite an interesting thing, that scientists work very similarly to artists. Meaning, it's interesting when you think about scientific. I'm sorry, I'm jumping all over, but it's interesting when you think about scientific methods. And scientific method, it always brings you to mind sort of an ultimate truth, right? Science is about truth. So scientific method is about proving this truth. Well, art perhaps is, I say perhaps, is the opposite. I mean, the art is very, there is no such a thing as truth in art. It will be very difficult to define what is truth in art. So there is this kind of conflictual difference. But then we realize more and more and more in science that this truth in science also doesn't exist. which science now is talking about that itself as well, because it all depends on the paradigm, on what kind of questions you ask. So the process of asking questions in a sense already defines the answers. So even that so-called truth in science and objectivity in science, it's becoming blurry, which is interesting, because then in art, maybe we start with blurriness and we arrive to some kind of focus. And what I'm saying that because I think when I say our objective is to arrive to a better way of collecting water from fog, this is our goal, but it doesn't necessarily mean we are going to arrive there. But yet it's the process that is important. And sort of that brings to my mind the kind of triangle that Buckminster Fuller was talking about, the design science. And Buckminster Fuller it's been a huge influence on me. Working with inflatables, in fact. This is how I came across. And he talks about the design science, where he says design science, the design is a process of realizing intentions. So there you have intentions that he says comes from the life experiences, and you take on a process of realizations. So you have to have intentions, then you take on the process of realization. And then he brings the science as a most rigorous method of evaluation of your realization. So in this kind of system, there's no such a thing as failure, because failure just means you have to start again, and it sort of creates the spiral. And in a sense, we can say spiral of evolution. And I like to think about it because, again, bringing back to why I say this is our intention. It doesn't mean we're going to arrive there, but yet those goals are kind of important to keep in mind. So bringing back all this to the more specific example of this work. So therefore it would be very difficult in the gallery to present, well, in art spaces, a real humidity. So this work has developed on this process of both working and using a fast camera to look at the very small scale of what is happening in the fog, and then sort of enlarging that to a different scale. So this scale changes. I feel it's something that science doesn't use very often, this shift in scaling. So suddenly the sort of idea was to bring a viewer into a level of water droplets in fog. And because it was, well, there is still idea of developing an installation with the real fog, but that would require a very specific space. And I hope that I will be able to do it in Montreal at the Foundry Darling. But here in this installation we used video and the light droplets as a olie instead of the water droplets. But it created a very immersive environment, and it was very, very special. I have to say that in my experience, it's always very special how kids respond to artwork. And personally, I feel always very happy when kids are happy. So, in this case, yes, the kids were super happy and they were staying a very long time, and they were saying that they were submerged in water. And so I'll show you now the three-screen video documentation of this installation. And there is also the sound, so we can hear the sound.
So, Anna, you were talking about the relationship that children have to the work. And as I said a little bit earlier, I was curious about the relationship between the general public, by which I think we could understand children as well, and a professional public. And so perhaps I'm going to phrase this question. When it comes to the art audience, for want of a better term, or we could call it critical response, whichever, how has a critical audience, the one used to the artworks themselves, as opposed to a general audience, how have you found their response to the work?
I think it's a little bit maybe, and I've been thinking about it sometimes, I think we're a little bit professionally jaded. It's just something that actually doesn't allow us to be as open perhaps as kids are. So we are so much predisposed to certain things, to certain expectations, and of course if it's just if it's an art audience, and I can even include myself, the way that I approach and see artworks and other artists, it comes with it's unfortunately it's kind of a side effect of being a professional. Meaning that because you've been exposed to something for so much, for so long, it's very difficult to be, you are not coming with fresh eyes, and it's very difficult to be surprised because you've seen so much, you know. So I think this is a kind of problem, and I think this problem again, it probably exists in any profession. It's just a professional disability. That's why, sorry, but that's why, you know, I think that kids, because they don't have that, so they really are more just spontaneous and have very different relation to it. And of course there depends on a variety of artwork. If it's a conceptual art, you know, then obviously it requires the knowledge, right? So that's the problem. I mean, there is all kinds of different variety of art productions. So some definitely require, and if some work with historical references and certain references, whatever the references can be, you need to know these references or you're lost. If it's something that it works, how can I say, on a sensorial feeling, emotion, sensations level, I think at that moment it can become more open to the general public, because we all have, in a sense, emotions, and that's how we can relate. Which actually, one comment I also going to make, which is interesting, you know, because again, from scientific, and that is being proven now in neurosciences, etc. We always thought that it's our mind and that controls emotions. So, but by now, I mean, science already has been talking about that it's not like that. That's actually our emotional response can create how the mind sort of sees things. So that for me, it's kind of again linked to what I was saying before about the truth in science. It's already becoming more tangible, something that we don't know. So all those relations, you know, emotion, mind, science, truth, are becoming blurry. I don't mind blurriness.
Anna, there's a description here about what you're up to. So I'd like to read it to you, and perhaps you can comment in your own words. It says here, she is concerned with issues of sustainability and technology as an opportunity for social transformation. It's a very general statement, of course, and goes on to say that you've had a particular interest in water. I wonder if you can just talk a little bit about this relationship between social transformation and I guess technology, let's call it, and water, and how you see the three developing together.
I'm going to focus on that. Well, the project I'm working on right now on collecting water from fog addresses the issue of water resources in the world. So, in a sense, it's a project about creating an alternative source of water supplies. And of course, it's not necessarily a source, it's not going to be ever a main source of water supply, and it's not going to work everywhere. There have to be a very specific condition where it is possible to harvest water from fog. However, in the same way that when we think about sustainability, and one thing very important in sustainability is to diversify and being able to create a variety of different sources for either water, or for energy, or for any, and also focusing on the sort of local conditions. So therefore, harvesting water from fog is an important issue in the regions when there's no precipitation, there's no rainwater, there's no groundwater, and yet there is actually quite a large number of water that comes in the form of fog. And there's all ecosystems that are developed based on that fact. Meaning, like even in Sahara Desert or Atacama Desert in Chile. So we can learn a lot from how both plants and animals deal with those conditions, and also apply to human population in those areas. So harvesting fog harvesting water from fog, it would be less perhaps relevant in Europe or in areas where we do have other main sources of water. But however, it is an important area to develop. So that's a driving aspect for me to be involved in sustainable issues, which water is going to become one of the main issues that we are going to face in the future. Technology because, well, I'm collaborating with scientists, and that is giving me an opportunity to access certain technologies that normally for me as an artist would not be accessible, or not as easy accessible. So that's a part that connects me to that. And society, I think an interesting part is that through developing an artwork on that subject, I am able to speak about this issue, again, loosely defined to a more general public, because we talk about this. There is an art public vis-a-vis, larger public. But however, it is a larger still voice than, for example, being just within scientific community. So it's a still communication, and it's a still widening and opening a possibility of communication. The way that I came to work with and collaborate with scientists, it was because I presented my piece, the cloud piece, at a symposium in Marseille at IMERA, which is already a center, a platform for artists and scientists to do the research. And this is where I met Jean-Marc Chomas, who is a physicist, scientist from L'École Polytechnique in Paris. So the cloud piece, it's an inflatable artwork. It's an inflatable structure in the shape of a cloud. And I invited people to pump water from the bottles that are placed on the ground into the cloud. And after a while, the cloud becomes heavier and therefore comes down. And at some point, there's an inside water, invisible water mechanism that spills that pump water. And then the cloud rains. And after it empties itself from the collective water, it becomes lighter again, and therefore it goes up. So in this piece, it was very important again to me to create a scenario of people's participation. And basically, the simplest put it is that we are all weather makers, right? So that connection between us and what's happening, it was very important in this piece, and to create, in a sense, the metaphor for that. So when I presented that piece, Jean-Marc approached me and we talked a lot, and then he came to Montreal and we were further talking together, and finally we decided to collaborate on that project of collecting water from fog.
I'm kind of curious whether theory or your reading of theory plays much of a role in this, and what theories it might be that do play a role, if any do. Certainly when we talk about science, as well as art, there's theory spread throughout those discourses, and some artists deploy them, others pay little attention to them. In your case, Anna, to what extent does theory play a role in your practice?
Well, I think theory is important, and one of my big influences as well during the time of many years that I focused and concentrated on inflatables was architecture, and all reference to the 60s and architectural groups of the 60s, so especially Archigram, British architectural group from the 60s that developed all kinds of wonderful projects that never been realized, but nevertheless they carry the sort of ideas, and obviously some can say utopian ideas. But I have to say, after all these years, I still find the 60s quite fascinating and interesting, because I think there was such a burst of all these kind of ideas that still carry importance today. I really feel that way. And so therefore they were already in the 60s talking about the environment. They were already addressing the issues of the relation between the technology and society. And we still are dealing with those questions in a very different way, but they are still important. And I guess I carry that belief that technology, can help us in certain way from them, and maybe later through Buckminster Fuller as well, the belief in technology although when I say that, I have to make a note that I'm not sure if I would extend it to artificial intelligence, and then it's a whole other issues around that. So yeah, when I refer to technology, I don't necessarily mean, or I don't go as far as artificial intelligence and everything that implies.
What about reading fiction or literature? Do you read literature much, and does it play a role for you as an artist?
Great question. When I was young, I read absolutely a lot literature, and it was super important to me. I think I read all Dostoevsky when I was 15, and Sartre, and all the, it was all like, because of my brother, I started to read Socrates when I was, I think, 10. And my brother was trying to have a philosophical conversation with me about it. And all what I remember is drawing little pictures of Socrates. So, yes, Rainer Maria Rilke, poets, it was super important to me in my sort of early development. So it's interesting. I think before I left Poland when I was 20, all the literature, poetry, philosophy, it was like really a huge main staple. And then it's interesting, I have to say, it's not that I stopped, but I'm definitely not as much involved in it as I used to be in my life. And I don't know, just my reflection here on a spot right here and now is that I wonder if it has to do something with language, meaning that through the kind of removal of the mother tongue or something, that suddenly it's sort of, I don't know if I can use the word association, but there is a little bit of the distancing. And then through schooling, I got very much involved in reading books, theory books. So then I became very involved in sort of developing my knowledge on that level. Philosophy as well. So what I'm trying to say that maybe these days I miss to have time just to be able to indulge in just reading something that is wonderful. So I don't know what to say, but at the same time I really enjoy reading. I really enjoy reading theory, design, architecture, philosophy. Maybe less philosophy these days, but yeah, books. So that's kind of on a higher list these days.
The cloud piece, especially, seems funny. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's scientific. Makes perfect sense. It's a demonstration, you might say.
Yes.
But the demonstration itself somehow makes one laugh. I don't know why. Do you find that with the nexus of art and science that you work with, and a work like the Cloud Project, do you find that, or did you intend, that a certain sense of humor would pervade the work?
It's an interesting and good question too. I think there is a sense of humor in my work, definitely. And it's not necessarily something that I specifically focus on when I'm making art, but it always somehow comes out. Maybe, I think maybe it has to do something working with inflatables. Yeah, it's interesting because when I'm thinking all the groups, the 60s group and architectural group in the 60s, I mean, their intent to use, it's actually an irony somewhat, because their intent was to criticize the mass consumerism and all the society and culture that being based on. Yet the legacy of what it remained today with inflatables are inflatables, toys, furnitures, and all those associations that we have. So it's interesting, and maybe by the nature of working in this area that somehow the humor comes out. But I also think that humor is a very important way of communicating sometimes very important messages. So it again, perhaps humor can break down certain boundaries, and it can be easier accessible for people. So humor is good.
You mentioned yesterday that we seem to be artists, contemporary artists, seem to increasingly divide into nomads and digital artists, meaning to say that the availability of studio spaces and also perhaps the attraction of studio spaces has diminished in contemporary artistic culture among artists. And there's the term post-studio environment that perhaps some artists describe as the environment within which they work. You yourself appear to be fairly nomadic, and you do work with digital productions, of course. How do you see yourself in terms of being a post-studio artist? Does it work for you? Is it your preferred mode?
I think it's the necessary way that I can function, survive in the current state of my life and environment. So I think it is a necessity to a large extent. Meaning, it's very, yeah, I became a nomadic artist because I've done lots of residencies, and a lot of my contacts and productions involve traveling and working in different places. And because of that, I wasn't long enough in Montreal in one place to just keep having a studio. And it's also when I had a studio for many years, when I was working on inflatable structures and large pieces, my space was too small. So therefore, I still, at the moment when I had to go into production, I had to go and work in a different space, because obviously reality is to pay for a huge space when you just use from time to time. It also doesn't work. So at that moment, because I was moving around and because I was working somewhere else when I was in production, that was the moment that I kind of my final resignation of a studio space. And now I am a nomad, and now I consider my studio being in Paris, which is funny because I consider to have a studio at Polytechnique. So it's a laboratory room. So that's, I consider my studio. And then majority of time I do work a lot with computers, yes. So a lot of preparatory works is done that way, and then it's if I go into specific production, so there's more. It's interesting. It's more in a sense of division into different steps of how to produce an artwork. So as I just said, there's like a preparatory, then if you go into production, then you sort of arrange that. It's interesting, it's almost like closer to the film production. just occurred to me. So it's a different way of operating, and it's very different to the idea, to the traditional more traditional idea of seeing an artist every day in the studio, or like a painting coming and doing touch up or doing work every day on something. The everyday something, it becomes totally different things today. And I commented many times to a few people, if I out of like 100% of being an artist 100%, that only 20% is my, what I can say, my creative time, and then 80% is administration. So therefore, I don't need a studio to do administration. And I can organize myself for the 20%, or even the 20 are creative times doesn't have to happen in the studio. It can absolutely happen anywhere. Walks are wonderful source of inspiration. So what I'm saying, yes, and I think it's a economic, reality of a lot of artists. It's more and more difficult to find a studio space. I can definitely say about Montreal, but I think it's the tendency everywhere as I talk to different artists. So the studios are becoming the spaces are becoming more and more expensive. And obviously with gentrifications, trends, etc., it's just very difficult to find affordable large spaces. So this whole economical shift that happens, and also because to survive, artists do have to move. So it's becoming a nomadic practice of survival, artistic survival. Yeah.
And of course, you have worked in residencies quite significantly. And do you find these residencies are useful or productive arenas within which to work, nomadically?
Yeah, I do, but I know that residencies are not for everybody. And I talk with different artists, and it really depends. And I guess going back to my experience, being a nomad, already, because I moved through different cultures and languages and countries. So I don't necessarily have this specific connection to a particular place. So therefore, in my life, I think without even thinking, this is how I am. And it's because of that I'm more adaptable to different environments and different circumstances, including even languages and etc. I know for a lot of people, a lot of Anglophone people, it's very difficult to pass the language barriers because English is a dominant language in the world. So therefore, there's already certain comfort in existing in that language. And it's very difficult to pass that barrier into another language because there are such steps as sounding like a child, like a kid, and not being very articulate. And coming from the level and comfort of your own language, it's very difficult to lower yourself in a sense to a different level. Because I had to do that many times in my life, I guess I'm just more used to it. So therefore, residencies, they always been very important and actually quite inspirational for me, because it also allowed me to be exposed to different artistic milieux, and because of that I could see many different things happening in different places. I find that inspirational, and even just basically I didn't mind being left alone in a sort of not familiar environment. I kind of find my way to exist. When again, sometimes in comparison to other artists that I had conversation with, they find it difficult, finding materials or finding access to things. It becomes a much complicated process. For me, when I'm not necessarily very medium specific or material, no, maybe not medium, material specific, I'm always was on the lookout for materials, and this is how I did my work in Finland. Because when I arrived there to the residency, the first thing that excited me was the garbage bags, meaning they were biodegradable garbage bags, and that was for biocompost. And I looked at this material, and it was almost like a silk. I fell in love with this material, what can I say? So, development of the piece that I did, the Green Line project that I did in Finland, it was because of that. And it was actually one of the most amazing experiences in my life, because I got the idea of doing this inflatable line that is going to connect an island with the mainland using biodegradable material, because it was very important for me to think about the environment. And also on such large scale, if there would be any accident or any break or anything, and if that material is going to go into water, into open environment, is not going to damage. But then when I felt like, oh my goodness, but how am I supposed to get this material in large quantity? And I called this, I found a company that produced this material in Finland. I made a phone call. And then I thought, well, forget it, who is going to call me back? And then after a week or something, they returned my call. We set up, it was such an amazing experience. We set up a meeting, I presented my project, they really liked it. They helped me with everything. With the public, we were blocking a public access of the canal for 24 hours where there were ships going, So they donated the whole material. They organized for me, a permit. It was just like incredible. So that was the project that inspired me to do the project in Rome, which, as I was describing, so I was coming from this idea that you can do it. When I arrived to Rome, and 3 years after working on that project, I realized that Rome is not Finland.
Maintaining a career, nomadic or otherwise, can be a very tricky thing for an artist. And I wonder how you found the construction of a career and maintaining it. I wonder if you found that difficult, or you've worked it, you might say, seamlessly through one experience to another.
I think the most difficult part of being a nomadic artist and doing a lot of residency, it was on my partner, who was always left behind. It's not easy because, this permanence of being somewhere and being rooted, it's not there. So this moving around, so it's like plus and minus, it's positive and negative. I think I'm particularly adapted to it, and I develop certain continuity in that, but I'm aware that it's not for everybody, and perhaps now I'm starting to feel that it would be nice to feel more rooted somewhere.
I have 3 more questions.
Okay.
A couple of them can be short.
Yes.
You work as a nomadic artist in the art system. In fact, several art systems, I should imagine. But of course, working internationally, you're confronted with the international art system, perhaps more than the national system here in Canada. I wonder if you have any thoughts about the system that you find yourself working through.
Oh, yeah. Being nomadic, I think I don't belong to any system. Meaning artistic system. It's always the cracks in between of the systems that I feel I exist in. Yeah. It's a lot of navigation. Yes, in between. It's not easy. Yeah. And as we were discussing it earlier, the whole idea of self-promotion, it's very different from how it was in the 90s when I was going to school and looking at young generation of artists today. The difference is so huge. I can't even remember being at school that we were even taught of, okay, the importance of putting back then slides together, CD portfolio or something like that together. That was not the most important thing that we were focusing on, because I guess in some maybe idealistic way of the truth of making art was more important. And I see people today, as we were saying, I would not even say that they are promoting themselves. It's like their opposite, modus operandi. This is how they are. This is not even for them self-promotion. This is how they are. So there's a big difference in those approaches as well.
So we're talking now, of course, social media technologies and so on and so forth, communication technologies. Do you find yourself involved in them after this learning curve, or do you keep a distance? Yeah.
I definitely keep a distance. I'm not on Facebook, I'm not on Twitter, I'm not on LinkedIn, I'm not on any of that, so one could say I'm still very old-fashioned in that sense. I just don't find, I always say, I don't have time for it. I find it requires time. Maybe this younger generation, basically, it's because it's so natural for them that they don't see it takes time. For me, it takes time. And also, I just have no desire. I find it more gossipy than anything else. So it's just not something that I'm interested in. But I found lots of people saying that I should be thinking about it because this is very important today.
Just out of curiosity, do you have a collector base, or do you have any relationship to collectors?
No, I don't have a collector. I don't have a gallery. I'm an independent artist.
And you're happy with that?
Happy is a relative term.
Last question. The relationship that we can have to artworks has often been characterized as to, on the one hand, the wow factor. Wow.
Wow factor, okay.
On the other hand, the aha factor. And in some respects, they divide, therefore, our relationship to artworks between what the situationists call spectacle, and on the other side, what we might call speaking to something fundamental. In any case, there has been an erosion of the idea of originality, a sense that somehow truth is fuzzy, as you were saying earlier. And if truth is fuzzy, then how does one organize something that might be, for want of a better term, authentic, something that is fundamental, or something that is somehow strikes us as real, over and opposed perhaps to the notion of spectacle. Well, in any case, I'm sketching out perhaps a historical conundrum as to how in this culture today we understand something as either false or somehow, fuzzy or not, true. Do you have any thoughts about this kind of culture that we're in now with respect to this question of what seems true and what doesn't?
Wow. What a question.
Water is true.
Yes. We need water. Without water, we don't survive. You can actually, what is interesting, you can go on with, you can go on starvation with you can live, for longer, not having, how is it? You can, basically you die faster if you don't have water as opposed to food, yes. So this is truth. It's funny because when you mention the division between wow and aha, even that it becomes somewhat obvious from historical perspective how this division is, what is spectacle and what is not. These two words don't define that to me, because for me, wow, it's still something that it's really exciting and new, and it doesn't have to be spectacular. And aha is more something that you acknowledge the existence, but somehow you are already somewhat familiar with it. So therefore, neither would necessarily address the issue of the society as a spectacle. But I think personally, I've thought about it a lot. I think that originality is overrated and authenticity is overrated. And I think we are in the process of moving beyond post-originality and post-authenticity. And I think it's good, because then we are in the process of actually thinking of humanity. Of course, I guess it's a kind of a question whether humanity is, and both are true, and it's probably like in mathematics, a line is a group of points, of infinite points, and undefinable points, and yet it creates a line. I still haven't got around to figure out how that works, but maybe humanity is composed of individuals, and they still create humanity as a group. And maybe exactly when we get rid of those notions of originality and authenticity, maybe this is, there are lots of already ideas, on the table, meaning open design, open source software, for example. So those ideas already are circulating. I think those issues are problematic, and they kind of maybe create a limit, pose a limit on us to see something else. Because if we want to think about the survival of humanity, we definitely have to be post-individualistic. And the whole issue of originality and authenticity is very much related to the very strong notion of individuality. And that's, this is how we were brought up, how we were educated, so it's very systematic that exists in this culture.